Alright, good day, everyone. I am making this video as sort of a thank you. My friends Clay and his lovely wife Nichole went to Japan on their honeymoon, and they so generously brought back these two original Nintendo Game Boy Japanese soccer games. And I thought, what better way to show my thanks and appreciation than to make a video going through the two of them, doing a little talk through and review. We'll start with J-League Fighting Soccer, the King of Ace Strikers, released in 1992. This is a port of, or at least was released simultaneously with, a Nintendo Entertainment System game of the same name. Both were published by International Global Services Incorporated, or IGS, and developed by Graphic Research Company Limited, or GRC. And of course, Fiona would like to play at this moment. Hey, come here. No. Hey, okay, whatever it is we're doing here, this, you meowing at me from the hallway, does not solve either of our problems. I just need you not to be meowing at me. Okay. Neither the developer nor the publisher here had much of a presence in North America. I struggle to point to anything by either entity that many Americans would be all that familiar with. IGS published a few TurboGrafx 16 games and the tie-in video game to the film The Rocketeer on Super Nintendo in America, and that's literally it. GRC seemed to traffic mostly in simplistic Game Boy games and had one late-era NES game entitled Widget, which will cost you a decent amount on eBay if you're at all curious. This game appears to be, from my research, the first game to bear the license of the J-League, which in 1992 had yet to officially kick off. The game features real J-League teams. There's Tokyo Verdy, Kashima Antlers, Urawa Red Diamonds. There's Nintendo's hometown boys, Gamba Osaka, as well as JEF United, or Jeff United, I don't know for sure, who were coincidentally sponsored by Sega at the time. My personal favorite, and they've unfortunately changed their logo in the years since, is Nagoya Grampus, whose logo was an orca kicking a soccer ball. They have an entire orca family of mascots. There's Grampus-kun, his wife Grampako-chan, as well as a son and daughter orca. And were I in charge of global football mascotry, I would personally have Grampus-kun Jr. and Sammy the Sounder do like a student orca exchange program for a year between the two clubs. Anyway, I've gone off track. It looks like we have actual rosters licensed here as well, or at least there's one prominent player that I recognize, which is the Brazilian star Zico on the Kashima Antlers. Zico was a pretty big get for the nascent J-League. He was serving in the cabinet of the Brazilian Prime Minister in the late 1980s before joining the Antlers when they were still a semi-professional team fighting to be included in the first season of the fully professional J-League in 1993. His legacy is, if not strong, it is surprisingly prominent in video games as well, or at least in Japan, as an Electronic Arts-produced Super Famicom game that bared his name was notoriously over-manufactured in Japan, to the point that it garnered the nickname Dirt Cheap Zico from the magazine Game Lab. The quality of being both cheap and available, and if you know a single word for the quality of being both cheap and widely available, please tell me. I racked my brain for a more efficient way to say that, but I couldn't think of one. Also led adult game developers to purchase a number of copies of Zico Soccer with the intent of reusing its game cartridge casing, swapping out the original game data board with that of an unlicensed adult game. So apparently there are a number of cartridges bearing Zico's name and face out there that, if plugged into a Super Famicom, will yield a player 16-bit smut. None of that here, though. The game that is at hand here actually seems to be relatively primitive, to say the least. The first thing that you'll notice is that there appear to be children on the field with the J-League players, not in the same way that there were children on the field with the Japan national team players in that sketch variety show segment, but what this really indicates is which guy is actually being controlled by the player. The bigger guy is you, the smaller guy is computer controlled until you make the switch, either on defense or you pass him the ball. The Game Boy had considerable computing power constraints, so there's never any more than about 3 to 4 players on screen at once. The Game Boy also had considerable ergonomic constraints, mainly in that we're left with only a directional pad, a B button, and an A button for in-game play. I feel that the obvious choice to make here would be to limit players to 2 actions, depending on the state of the game. Maybe with the ball, you could press A to pass and shoot with B, like they had in the original NES soccer game with those high kicks. Maybe in defense, you challenge the ball with A and slide with B. You have 2 buttons, then you can do 2 things. That seems fairly straightforward to me, but GRC instead opted to make the A button a de facto all-action button, and then made the B button cycle between actions that one can take. You'll see a chyron at the bottom right corner of the screen that indicates some abbreviation of an action. TAC for tackle, JUM for jump, PAS for pass, etc. Players must cycle through options and then press the A button to enact them. Almost like in a JRPG turn-based combat system, but in real time. It is not satisfying to find oneself in shooting position in the box while frantically trying to cycle to the SHO command with the defender bearing down on you. The entire experience kind of mirrors my actual athletic exploits, in that my opponent always feels like they are simply more capable, better coordinated than I can hope to be. The computer here does not have to undertake the option cycling that I do. It just acts just that bit more proactively than I can, and as a result, I gave up a fair share of goals. Perhaps with practice, it would get more natural. I was able to win a match by the end of the footage recording session, but I leave this primarily charmed by the efforts and ambitions that the developers put into creating a somewhat complex recreation of the sport for such a limited console. For a full, fair critical reflection, I must, I suppose, put myself in the shoes of a Japanese person in the early 1990s. I can remember as a youth that I preferred the Konami Pro Evolution Soccer games, but routinely bought FIFA because it had the Major League Soccer license and I wanted to play as my team in the game. So for fans who were excited about this incoming J-League, seeing their local team in a video game for the first time ever may have helped this to overcome the relative clunkiness of its execution. The music's alright, too, I should say. Our second game is Jalico J-Cup Soccer. There may be a different way to pronounce that name, but I am sticking with Jalico for the remainder of this video. This was published by Jalico, developed by Tosei, and released on the Game Boy in 1993. Unlike J-League Fighting Soccer, this game actually saw release outside of Japan under the name Goal. The American release is named like it's a port of the original NES game that was released in 1998, though the perspective here is actually closer to the sequel, Goal 2, which came out concurrently with this game. It's more of that isometric angular view in Goal 2 than it is kind of like a top-down direct view in Goal 1, so I think it's probably more closer to a port of the sequel. Tosei and Jalico have a good pedigree with sports games of this era. They were responsible for the Bases Loaded and Play Action football series, which were both impressively robust given their era and their hardware, though I think that was actually almost detrimental to the legacies that both series left because console players might not have been ready to appreciate such complexity at the time. I can remember playing NES Play Action football and being just so baffled by the idea and the audacity that the developers had to allow players to get tired over the course of the game. I was like, why are they getting fatigued? That's ridiculous. This is a Nintendo game. And Now every game has that, because that just makes sense to do that, because that's a real thing that happens to football players. But maybe back in the day people weren't ready for that. And before I really dig into J-Cup soccer, I have to point this out. We have like sort of an Operation Condor / Armor of God situation here. The first NES goal came out in North America and Europe under the title Goal with 1 exclamation mark. But in Japan, it was released under the title Moero Pro Soccer. Moero meaning like passionate, the title given to several other Jaleco published sports games, including the original Basis Loaded. The NES sequel in North America was Goal 2, with the number 2 spelled out, which you don't really see that often. Goal 2 with the numeral 2 was the title in most of Europe. It was Eric Cantona Football Challenge Goal 2 in France, named for a great French player of the time. I'll show that video of him kicking a guy in the stands. Oh, what's going on here? And since there was no Goal in Japan, but the Moero franchise had been retired, the game was released as Goal, simply Goal, but with 2 exclamation points in Japan. So Goal 2 here was their goal, was the French's Eric Cantona Football Challenge. Now, the Game Boy port, which is supposed to be the subject of this part of the video, I come to realize, was Goal in North America and Europe, even as it was based on Goal 2. But regardless, it then saw a release as Jaleco J-Cup Soccer in 1993, and later saw a re-release in 1994 as Takeda Nobuhiro no Ace Striker, which was named for a great Japanese player of the time. About the game itself, I think the first thing to notice is the lack of any official real-world licensing, especially in comparison to the first game in this video. Lacking an NFL or MLB license might have doomed a baseball or football game, but with the soccer game, developers could basically get away with using national flags and anonymous or pseudonymous players for a very long time. And here, we're offered a good range of national teams to choose from. Canada apparently qualified for the Jaleco J-Cup nearly 30 years before they qualified for the actual World Cup. Regardless, we have no player names, but I like that players each have unique statistics that make an identifiable difference in play. A player with a 9 rated speed is notably faster than a player with a 6 rated speed, and you're able to strategize around your personnel, and you can pick to play from a few formations. This is a level of depth that I just didn't expect from a Game Boy soccer game, and it is fairly impressive. I started off with a very conservative approach, 3 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 1 striker. I found quickly that my AI defenders ended up just kind of retreating to the corners, becoming basically useless in both defense and attack. I found us constantly defending, and a few times I ended up overexerting myself and drew penalties because I didn't expect for the game to call penalties. But it does. It also calls yellow and red cards, and you'll lose players to injuries from yellow or red card challenges sometimes, and you'll have to replace them. I found that I could only really generate anything in the attack by using the game's isometry against itself. Your players seem to run faster in what would be a diagonal line on the field of play, but a straight up and down line on the Game Boy screen. Armed with this information, I chose a 1-2-2-2
I took 4 deux at 6 o'clock, knowing what this would be.
Formation with a sweeper in defense. I overloaded my right side with my fastest players, and I had them take possession on the right wing and dribble diagonally at top speed towards the goal before shooting from distance. The Griffin Dorsey strategy, if you will. This worked not well, but I struggled to get really anything to work well in this game. The core aspect of this game with which I struggled came in maintaining possession. I tended to dribble too much and not pass enough, but I never had a great sense of where to pass the ball because most of my players, again due to the technical constraints of the Game Boy itself, were off-screen, and it felt as if I made every pass of any length on faith and faith alone. I should say these are both admirable games. This era of gaming, and particularly sports gaming, fascinates me because developers had to struggle to adapt a constrained understood aspect of reality onto machines that could only kind of gesture at accurately representing it for a really long time. Certain genres of games allowed players to feel new realities. They could, with a video game for the first time, control magic or take part in interstellar dogfights or engage in Mario activities. But sports games had the burden of reflecting realities that players already knew. I've never personally played in a World Cup, but even from recreational soccer experience, I know the feeling of having a ball at my feet with defenders approaching and a decision to make. Both games had their own methods of emulating that. Fighting soccer gave me a little bit too much control for the console to handle, and Jollico J Cup gave me too little. There's this kind of rhetorical sense that you can feel as a player. The developers had to make decisions on what they considered to be the key aspects of this sport to emulate in a video game, but they had to pick and choose what they could do. GRC, through fighting soccer, seems to show soccer as a game of decision-making first and speed second, while Tosei chose to highlight speed first and decision-making second, and it seemed that we just couldn't really have both with the technology of the time, or at least if we did, these two games don't fully reflect as much. But God, do I admire that they tried. These games both represented steps, regardless of how small they were, on the path to where we are now. I don't know that I would have developed such a love for this sport had it not been for video games. So, to interact with such basic soccer games like this is actually a really cool experience, and I think it's taught me something about what I appreciate, not just about the sport, but also about just the entire history of video games in general. So, yeah.
Hey, here we are, sitting on the floor, propping another camera up on my knee and kind of ballasting it against my sofa. I realized in the filming process that I hadn't written a proper conclusion to this video, and so I sort of half stumbled through a few ad-libbed conclusions, and then I said, oh, I'll just figure it out in editing, and now that I'm editing, it has come to my realization that that is not how this works. So here I am, ad-libbing one final conclusion, seated on the floor in a different shirt, not wearing my glasses, several days later. I hope it makes sense. Thank you, everybody who watched this video. Most importantly, thank you to Clay and Nichole both for so generously bringing me something back from your honeymoon. That is absolutely so appreciated. I cherish the fact that I know you both, and once again, thank you. And before I finish this thought, I can't think of something to end the video with. So, damn it. I really should have just ended on that prior. Very nice thought. I'm going to give you, I'll give Fiona clips. You're going to get, here's a clip of Fiona to end the video.
Fiona.
Fiona is a cat.
Fiona is a cat.
She's a little kitty. Oh, she is so pretty.
Is here.
That was witty.
You got your nice little eyes, kitty girl. Mm-hmm.
Yes, stretch out. Oh. Yeah, she's getting a nice stretch.
She get good.
She's gonna pounce.
A little jump.
You can make it.
A little kitty cat jump.
Do it.
I don't think I want to clog in my thighs, but
Come on, Fiona, you can do it. Prepping?
Nope. And giving up. It's okay. It's because she likes me so much.